Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere Aki nei, an armed shooter is believed to be on the run in Christchurch after seriously wounding a man. Public humiliation and victim blaming and shaming is standard at Gloriavale, according to a court witness. The loo paper company allegedly treating its workers like you-know-what. Police ramp up anti-ram raid resources in the face of fierce criticism. So what does that actually look like? A Dunedin man whose death is linked to the COVID vaccine wasn't warned of the specific heart risks. The tax collectors having a second bite at your KiwiSaver, and Auckland's popular Armageddon Expo could blow apart if it can't land a venue.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Kia ora, I'm Marama Tipole. Police are still hunting a gunman following a shooting in Christchurch. Police blocked off sections of Hereford Street and Stanmore Road in the suburb of Linwood this morning after a man was shot near the corner. A hospitality worker says it was shocking to see armed police just metres from her business. Urmila from Mumbai Local Takeaways says the heavy police presence is out of character for the area.
There are some police officers definitely in the corner. So one of the road has been blocked, I guess, by them. So we are here from 1 year, but we haven't seen anything what happened here.
The shot man is in a serious condition in Christchurch Hospital. The Greens co-leader Marama Davidson is refusing to remove her social media posts about Whittaker's chocolate, despite a prime ministerial scolding. Ms Davidson yesterday tweeted a photo of the chocolate bars, which have been branded with te reo wording for creamy milk, miraka kirimi. The Cabinet Manual says ministers should not endorse any product, and Jacinda Ardern says it would be advisable for Ms Davidson to remove the posts, but Ms Davidson says she won't.
I am promoting Te Reo Māori. I am promoting organisations who are stepping up to promote Te Reo Māori, and I am pushing back against the racism that arose by something as simple as beautiful as more use of Te Reo Māori.
Police are putting extra resources into trying to stop ram raids which are affecting businesses, particularly in Auckland. Just 5 stores in the city have received security upgrades as part of the government's $6 million support fund launched in May. Acting Assistant Commissioner Dave Lynch says over the next couple of weeks, another 12 staff will be specifically tasked to retail crime prevention. And there'll be more on this on Checkpoint shortly. A company that locked workers out of a Kawerau toilet paper mill hopes to resolve their pay dispute by the end of this week. Essity will meet with the Pulp and Paper Workers Union on Thursday and Friday this week. The two groups have been at an impasse for 3 weeks over pay. The union refused Essity's initial offer of a 3% pay increase, demanding 7% to match inflation. But Essity, which employs 200 people in the town, says its offer is fair. A Pike River miner whose son died in the 2010 explosion says he hopes future survivors have an easier path than him. New standards are now in place for ministries and agencies dictating how they support survivors of large-scale disasters. They include agencies working together so survivors don't get asked the same questions and telling the truth even when it's hard. Pike River miner Rowdy Durbridge, who lost his son Dan in the disaster, says lies the men were still alive were wicked.
To sit there in meetings and be told that your men are having crib, which is lunch, and water, and they've got air and all that. It was wicked. I can't really describe it without swearing, so I'm not going to swear.
The standards have been co-authored by families affected by tragedies including Pike River and the Christchurch terror attacks. The owner of the pharmacy that administered the COVID injection to a man who later died missed a warning about the vaccine risks. Rory Nairn was not warned of the risk of myocarditis when he received his first Pfizer dose on November the 5th last year. The 26-year-old plumber experienced heart flutters that night and died 12 days later of the rare condition. The Ministry of Health advised clinicians in late August to be aware of the risk of myocarditis following the death of a woman due to the condition. The pharmacy owner, who has name suppression, told the inquest she was receiving a lot of information daily about the vaccine rollout and missed the warning. It's coming up to 4 minutes past 5. Under fire, All Blacks captain Sam Cane says his substitution late in the weekend loss to Argentina wasn't a planned move. Kane is under pressure to keep his place in the side after a couple of error-ridden performances. The All Blacks team to face the Pumas in Hamilton on Saturday will be named on Thursday, and Kane says he agrees with how decisions are made around who takes the field.
I back the coaches when they make a decision to sub someone, whether that's me or anyone else. They're doing it with the best interests of the team at heart, and that's how decisions are made in this team. So, yeah, I don't take it personally by any means.
And first five Bowden Barrett says he is just about ready to go as he recovers from a neck injury. Serena Williams signalled she's not quite ready for retirement after advancing to the second round of the US Tennis Open with a scrappy 6-3, 6-3 win over Danka Kovinic of Montenegro. The victory over the 80th ranked Kovinic, Elisa, is just Williams' second win this year and was followed by an on-court video celebration of the 40-year-old's career. Williams says she's been contemplating what comes next when she hangs up her racket after the Open.
Sometimes I think it's harder to walk away than to not, and that's been the case for me. And so I've been trying to decide for a little while what to do. So I love it because it keeps you fit, so that's a bonus.
Meanwhile, in the men's draw, Greek fourth seed Stefanos Tsitsipas has been knocked out of the Grand Slam after suffering a shock defeat to Colombian qualifier Daniel Galán in the first round. That's the news.
Ukraine launches a new counter-offensive.
Ukrainian forces have managed to break through the first line of Russian defense around the city.
The government launches new guidelines for disaster victims.
It feels like we've got some power back, and it's great for us to feel empowered, and that's the way we want other families in the future to feel.
And a rocket to the moon fails to launch.
A lot of disappointed folks at NASA, they're going to take a break. They've been up for almost 24 hours.
3, 2, 1, take off. Morning report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
RNZ National, Lisa Owen and Checkpoint next. Right now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight. Wednesday, Northland, Auckland and Coromandel. Fine apart from a few showers, mainly about Coromandel and north of Orewa. Waikato to Wellington, also Bay of Plenty, the Central High Country and Wairarapa. Generally fine, 1 or 2 showers possible inland and some frosty areas tomorrow morning. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloudy periods with isolated showers, clearing to become fine about Hawke's Bay. Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with variable high cloud. For Nelson, the odd shower about Golden Bay, otherwise fine. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, mostly cloudy with a few showers. Rain developing about Westland and Fiordland tomorrow, heavy at times. For Otago and Southland, mainly fine with high cloud. A possible shower about Dunedin and Clutha. Scattered rain for tomorrow evening. And for the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with a few light showers clearing tomorrow. It's 7 minutes past 5.
Nā mihi marama. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint te tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Police are searching for an armed shooter tonight who allegedly fired a shot near a busy shopping area in Christchurch. One person's been taken to hospital after being injured in the incident in Linwood. An investigation has been launched, but so far no arrests have been made. Our Otatahi reporter Neva Chittick joins us from the scene. Neva, what do we know so far?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, police responded to a report of a shot being fired about 11:15 this morning on the corner of Hereford Street and Stanmore Road. So it's round about where I am now, sort of directly opposite it. It's a small green space with a bit of a park bench, and the whole road was closed off. So Hereford Street from Stanmore Road right back to Fitzgerald Ave, and Stanmore Road between Cashel Street and Worcester Street was closed off. There's a lot of traffic here. It's quite busy. There are 2 roundabouts, so it was a lot of disruption for residents. There were a lot of people milling around at the cordon asking what was going on, whether they'd have access to their house, to their family members, and there were armed police standing at all the cornered points of the cordon. There was also police out with metal detectors going around the roundabout and across the road. And later on, when the cordon came down around 2 o'clock, fire and emergency personnel came by to pour water over the scene and perhaps get rid of evidence.
So you mentioned that locals were curious as to what had happened. What have they said, or how have they reacted to the fact there's been a shooting?
Well, I talked to a few business owners earlier, and one of them said that this sort of thing is pretty unusual. It's normally quite quiet. It's quite affronting for them to see armed police standing outside their shops. A couple of them said that they had no knowledge of the cordon until they looked out the window and then saw an armed police guard there. So a lot of them, it was shock. For some of them as well, they were quite curious as to why it was here and why they hadn't really heard much about it. As far as we know, though, everyone was safe and there was no cause for concern in terms of residents. They were allowed back into the cordon as it went on.
And so what advice has been given to people in the area?
Police have got an increased presence here for the next wee while. They haven't said exactly how long that will go on for. The advice to people is pretty much continue on like normal. Anyone with information is being urged to come forward to police, and that goes for concerns as well. So if anyone is feeling a little bit unsafe or wants a bit of reassurance, police are encouraging them to come forward. In terms of how people are feeling here, it's amazing, really. The street is pretty much back to normal. It's a beautiful evening here. The sun is out, and by and large, people seem relatively okay. There doesn't seem to be any trace of what happened here this morning either, which I guess is a good thing for people's peace of mind.
Thanks for the update, Neva. That's Neva Chittick joining us live from the scene of that shooting earlier in the day. It is 5:10. Kia amo tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. In the wake of fierce criticism, police are promising extra resources to protect businesses from ram raiders, with more than a dozen officers being trained to carry out security assessments. It follows revelations that just 5 stores in Tamaki Makaurau had received security upgrades as part of the $6 million support fund launched by the government in May. Businesses have told Checkpoint it's near impossible to access the money. Overnight, there's been at least another half dozen smash and grabs, and in the past year, numbers have more than doubled. Acting Assistant Commissioner Dave Lynch says the police sympathise with small business owners.
That's why we are rolling out over the next couple of weeks some extra resource, which will be specifically tailored to the Retail Crime Prevention Program, which is enacting the government commitment of $6 million from the proceeds of Crime Fund. Over the next couple of weeks, we'll have a dozen or so staff that'll be primarily trained and committed to working with some of the small business owners who fit the definition of the MB small business in relation to assessing what we can do to assist them target hardening their business to prevent them becoming repeat victims.
Well, they'll be pleased to hear that. Why are there only 5 businesses in Tamaki Makaurau who have been funded for security upgrades out of this $6 million so far?
Yeah, so we are working through a procurement process, so that does take time. We've got permission to go through an emergency procurement process now, and that will mean that there will be about 18 providers that will be working with nationally, which should allow us to roll out target hardening packages to those that fit the criteria in a relatively short space of time.
When you say emergency procurement, what do you mean, and how's that different from what you've been doing?
Well, we need to follow government procurement rules when we're spending Crown money. MB is working with us in relation to the contractors. There is an emergency procurement approach pathway that we can take in some circumstances.
So does that mean it's faster? Because it sounds like a lot of bureaucracy, and what dairy owners are telling us is that lots of them have called the police and said, how do I get this money? They've been told there's no application form, don't worry, we'll get back to you about it, and they've never heard anything more.
What we're doing is working on past victimisations of small retailers, but the first thing is they do have to meet the MB definition of a small business. So anyone can contact the police with 2 layers of response. So anyone can contact the police and ask for some support around, some advice around some basic target hardening measures. In addition to that, those who are eligible for the Small Retail Crime Prevention Fund will have an additional assessment, and that's where we're training a dozen or so staff at the moment.
Okay, there's a lot in this. So let's start with your use of the phrase past victimisation. So do you have to have been hit in a ram raid or a smash and grab or similar to qualify for this assistance?
We'll be looking at those that are considered the most vulnerable, and the evidence would tell us that those have been hit are in that category. We need to start somewhere, and that's where we're prioritising it for the initial rollout of the program.
What about those businesses that are in vulnerable areas who may not have been hit before?
We need to prioritise where we're going to get the most effect in relation to using that funding, and that needs to start with those that are considered the most vulnerable. Businesses that are in a general location, which could be regarded as a hotspot, would certainly be assessed as to whether the priority of the rollout of the program will apply there as well.
How much of that $6 million prevention fund has been spent so far?
There's still the procurement process, so I'm not aware. I know we've done 21 assessments, but we're working with MB to get the procurement side of things to enable the actual target hardening measures to roll out as soon as possible.
Is bureaucracy standing in the way of getting this done? Because it kind of sounds a bit like that.
Look, there's procurement processes that we have to go through, and we're going through those as quickly as we possibly can.
If I can just return to the training that you say officers are undertaking so that you can ramp up this program for the security funding, I mean, what training are they getting, and how long before they're out doing the assessments and getting the money through to people?
Yeah, so they've been trained around STEP, which is crime prevention through environmental design. We will have 12 staff trained within the next 2 weeks, which will enable us to be doing 40 to 50 assessments per week.
When you talk about environmental design, do you mean bollards?
We're talking fog cannons, shatterproof toughened glass, bollards, roller doors, there's lighting. There's a whole raft of things that would go into consideration, but it does really need a case-by-case assessment, and that's what those assessors will be trained to do.
Acting Assistant Commissioner Dave Lynch there. It is 16 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. A heated dispute between locked-out workers at the Kawerau paper mill and the company they work for has escalated to the Employment Relations Authority. ST and the Pulp and Paper Workers Union will meet on Thursday and Friday to try and find a way forward. Meanwhile, the hygiene manufacturer is challenging the legality of some union strikes to see if its workers could be liable for damages. Anei te kairipoata, Felix Walton.
Tane Phillips of the Pulp and Paper Union says he's relieved the dispute is now in the hands of the ERA, something the union has been pushing for. He hopes facilitation will encourage ST to negotiate.
My ultimate goal, that we come to some sort of agreement that we can put before our members, and keep up with inflation.
One of the workers on strike, Bill George, says they approached the company in good faith. Now he feels hurt and disrespected after working for more than 30 years.
When COVID was hitting, people were dying, the whole mill came together. We all did overtime and so forth because we knew we had to supply the public with the paper. We all got through it, and then all we wanted was just a bit of thanks and respect from the company. And what do we get? Nothing.
Despite inflation soaring beyond 7%, ST offered workers just a 3% pay rise this year. Mr. George and others like him decided to make a stand and go without pay, despite the challenges that presents.
To be honest, I've already rung up the bank. I can't keep on going like this, and then they try and hit us with this kind of rubbish. I mean, geez. We've got some food bank down at Kawerau. There's a lot of people to thank, the whole Kawerau community, friends, neighbours. I never thought I'd be like this.
Bill George is caring for 2 grandchildren, each with disabilities, and he's unsure how he'll provide for them if the strike continues. He hopes ST will allow negotiations to continue so the groups can find a solution.
We're just going around in circles, and you're destroying families. That's what I'm saying to ST. First it was, I could see their point of view, but, I'm starting to hurt.
Workplace Relations Minister Michael Wood says he tries to stay out of disputes, but is urging both parties to behave with common sense.
I've seen some behaviour that's been reflected publicly, which seems at the extreme end of things, and I'd urge all of those parties, as I say, to think about how they can get a resolution instead of winding things up further.
Minister Wood says it's quite unusual for a company to threaten its own employees with legal action.
In a statement, Essity says average earnings of union employees at Kawerau is $120,000 per year, including overtime. It says it's offering 14.7% over 3 years, and the union's request for an upfront 7% increase ignores soaring production costs. Now, in breaking news, former Australian rugby player and teacher Chris Dawson has been found guilty of killing his wife. The story gained international attention with the rise of the Teacher's Pet podcast, raising questions about the 1982 disappearance of Lynette Dawson. The verdict took hours to deliver in the New South Wales Supreme Court. It is 5:19 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Coming up, the tax taker is about to nibble at a bit more of your KiwiSaver. We'll have the details. Homai or whakaaro. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Let us know what you think about police beefing up security assessments, training 12 officers to go out and do security assessments for businesses that have been ram-raided. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go to the headlines now. Ko marama anō tēnei.
Thanks, Lisa. A gunman remains on the loose after a shooting in Christchurch this morning. Police blocked off sections of an intersection in the suburb of Linwood after a man was shot there around 11:15am. The victim is in a serious condition in Christchurch Hospital. Acting Assistant Commissioner Dave Lynch says the police are beefing up resources in an effort to stop ram raids, with another 12 staff to be specifically tasked with retail crime prevention over the next fortnight. He told Checkpoint the police sympathise with small business owners. A former member of Gloriavale has told the Christchurch Employment Court of the incredible pressure to prepare meals for hundreds of community members with only 2 others. Gloriavale's leaders deny the claims that the women were employees. A Dunedin pharmacy owner has told an inquest into the death of 26-year-old Rory Nairn, who later died after receiving a COVID injection, that she missed a warning about the vaccine risks. Toilet paper manufacturer Essity hopes to resolve its pay dispute with workers at its Kawerau factory by the end of this week, when it will meet with the Pulp and Paper Workers Union. And Greens co-leader Marama Davidson says she'll not remove any social media posts promoting Whittaker's chocolate, as she's pushing back against racism and supporting Te Reo Māori. It's 5:21.
Ngā mihi marama. A court has been told victim blaming and shaming was standard at Gloriavale, where girls caught in inappropriate relationships with married men were called whores. 6 former Gloriavale women want the employment court to rule they were employees, not volunteers, during their time at the West Coast Christian community. Jean Edwards reports.
Isaac Pilgrim says he worried about his daughter Serenity's safety when she was working alone at night. He says the women in his family often freaked out when Gloriavale's leaders touched them.
The leadership are allowed to touch the girls, anyone they want. By anyone, I mean particularly the single girls. They would be talking to them, giving them cuddles. If you ever tried to say there was anything sexual or inappropriate about their behaviour with the girls, you were totally destroyed, annihilated.
He says it was standard for girls to be publicly humiliated for inappropriate relationships, and the leaders modelled victim shaming and blaming.
They are usually labelled as whores and it's shamed in front of the community even if nothing physical has occurred. Even if a girl has done nothing wrong, but it is discovered that something has been inappropriately done to her by a man, the girl's reputation is tarnished.
Mr Pilgrim says his wife was treated like a slave, and he was criticised for spending $60 on food for her after she nearly died in childbirth.
I felt that money mattered more than the life of my wife. I felt like all I cared about was my wife pumping out more and more kids so that they could collect more and more money from the government.
Mr Pilgrim says women and girls were yelled at and publicly shamed if they were late doing jobs like getting the breakfast ready. His daughter Serenity told the court she was forced to stand up and apologise in front of 600 people.
I would cry. I felt very nervous. It's embarrassing. You've made a mistake and you're being publicly humiliated for that mistake.
Another former Gloriavale woman, Pearl Vella, described how she and 2 others once cooked for the entire community.
That's the sort of thing that happened and happens often now. Just 3 people cooking for the entire community. It is an incredible amount of pressure.
Mrs. Vella says she'd sometimes get up for work at 2 o'clock in the morning, and changes to the rules around early starts only meant less time to get everything done.
I always felt I owed them. No matter how much work I did, it only ever amounted to my bed, my clothes and my food.
Isaac Pilgrim says anyone who disagreed with Gloriavale's leaders was totally destroyed.
They would just shame you into silence.
The court also heard Gloriavale members were denied proper dental care and had to have teeth pulled instead of other procedures because of the cost. The Christian community's leaders strongly contest the women's claims and deny they were ever employees.
It is 24 minutes after 5. You're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. The government plans to charge GST on KiwiSaver fees as part of a tax bill brought in today. It's estimated to bring in $225 million a year in tax from 2026 and is expected to have a massive knock-on effect to the amount of money in KiwiSaver accounts. Alan Bulow is a partner and tax specialist at Deloitte and joins us now. Kia ora, Alan.
Kia ora. Thanks.
Hey, in the simplest of terms, what's this going to mean for people?
What's this going to mean for people, particularly KiwiSaver people, is it'll mean that they'll be being charged GST on top of their KiwiSaver fees, where in the past they haven't. And the individual fees and the GST on there doesn't seem like much, but because of the compounding effect, the magic of compounding interest, well, the magic of compounding costs is also just as big, which is why over the lifetime of your investment, this is going to be a pretty significant change.
Yeah, so can you give us an example, or are there some numbers or forecasts around how much is going to go west out of people's KiwiSaver as a result?
Sure, and with all of these sort of examples and things, you were talking estimates and bits and pieces, so I think it's best for us to use the ones that Inland Revenue have published in their regulatory imports statement. And what they've got is for one investor, for an example, after 25 years, this change would drop the level of savings that they had by the end of the period of over $20,000. So you're talking some pretty significant sums. And the ones that just get mind-boggling is when you look at long-term and some of the Financial Markets Authority calculations. By 2070, they're saying that this change will decrease the cumulative KiwiSaver balance by over $100 billion.
So why are they coming for KiwiSaver? I mean, we don't pay GST on bank fees and services.
No, we don't. I see KiwiSaver as basically being collateral damage for some technical GST things that keep GST geeks like me all interested and happy that happen in the non-KiwiSaver managed fund sector, which does have a degree of messiness around it, and there are some different treatments that have arisen because of IRD treatments that have been agreed over the years, etc. But because they're trying to tidy everything up, you can't come along and say non-KiwiSaver investments, we're going to treat all of those fees as fully taxable in a new world and not do KiwiSaver, because you'd create real tensions. So that's why I say it's a sledgehammer and collateral damage for KiwiSaver. And our suggestion, which was one of the options that was considered, would just be that they legislate the status quo to eliminate any confusion for the non-KiwiSaver sector by allowing people to keep what they're doing.
With inflation at the moment, the government's, in a win-win situation, taking record, GST returns. So is this a new tax?
I think certainly whenever I've been talking to people today and they've been KiwiSaver members and I've asked them that question, they've certainly said yes, that they see this as a new tax. It's coming in from 1 April 2026, so a bit of lead time. But the estimates are that an extra $225 million is coming out on something that hasn't been taxed and clearly hasn't been taxed since 1986 when GST came in, and they're having to specifically make law changes to bring this within the system. So I certainly think it would be justified to call this a new tax.
Can you give us a perspective GST take at the moment? I mean, how much is it and what is it? How does it look compared to past years?
GST take, we're up on past years, a little bit down in some little areas and some bits and pieces, but certainly we're up on prior years. Inflation, you'd expect in some ways to do that because GST is a tax on the goods and services that goes through. And GST collects a massive amount for the government. Don't have the exact numbers to hand, but we're talking literally that it's coming through and collecting well over the amounts that they collect for corporate income tax.
So do they actually need this money?
That would depend on who you're asking and who they're saying what they need things for. The bit with what you do after you collect the money is something that us as tax geeks never really get to talk about, and that's the decisions that they've got to work through. But we look at the technical of, do we think this is a good way to collect the money? And our view is that this is not.
Really appreciate your time, Alan. That's Alan Bulow, who's a partner and tax specialist at Deloitte. And interested in your reckons on that one, text us on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. It is 29 past 5. Kia amo tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National, and it's time for the business news. Sticking with the business theme, ko taku hoa I Naianei, ko Nona Peltier, who joins me in the studio. Okay, Nona, early education operator. It's called Evolve, and it's selling its New Zealand business. Why?
Yeah, they're selling 105 centres here in New Zealand. They're saying that basically they're not as profitable as they'd like them to be, and they've sort of laid the blame really on the government's COVID response, which has meant that they've had a harder time finding staff, but also closures at the early childhood centres meant that about 80% of their underlying earnings are now coming from Australia. So they're going to sell their business here in New Zealand, and they're going to invest that money in Australia, where they expect to be more profitable. So they're expecting to get about $46 million. It's not going to result in any job losses. It's subject to shareholder approval, but certainly the shareholders must have liked it, because the share price rocketed up 17% today as a result of that announcement.
That's interesting. I am interested in this new research too that identifies housing as a critical concern for an ageing population. That'll be what, people who are reaching pension age, they've never owned a home, so rent becomes a big issue?
But it's not only for the people who don't own their own homes. That is an issue. One of the things they found was that housing pressures are expected to rise, so that the number of people in their late 60s renting by 2048, so that's a number of years from now, is expected to hit about 40%. That's twice the number that there is now. So that's going to require some thought about how that's going to be paid for, because as we know, rental costs are quite expensive. It's not like when you own your own home and then maybe you can sell it, move on, and what have you. Now, but for the people today who own their own home, according to this, more than half of the superannuitants who are paying off mortgages, they're using 80%, more than 80% of their super fund to cover those costs. So even though you may own a home, or whether you have one or not, those costs, housing costs, are a big part of what you're spending your money on. And that is what the Retirement Commission, this is a report, and the commissioner is saying, look, this needs to be looked at. It does have implications for how we fund superannuation in the future.
Yeah, okay, let's go to the markets, Nona.
Yeah, so look, part of the reason we did so well, you might have heard yesterday, A2 Milk is going to return some money to shareholders. That helped underpin the market, as well as Evolve's big increase there in their share price. The top 50 index, it rose 1.25%. That was a 142-point gain to 11,649. Yeah, the New Zealand dollar is still sluggish to say the least. Certainly not helped at all by some of the remarks by the U.S. Federal Reserve over the weekend at 61.4 U.S. cents, 89.2 Australian, and 52.5 British pence. So a bonus for those Australians skiing down south.
Thanks, Nona. Ka kite, Nona Peltier with business news there. A Dunedin man whose death is linked to the COVID-19 vaccine was not warned of the risks of myocarditis when he received the shot. An inquest into the death began in the Dunedin District Court this morning. Dunedin plumber Rory Nairn died last November, less than a fortnight after the 26-year-old received his first dose of the Pfizer vaccine. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown has been following the inquest, and he joins us now. Kia ora, Timothy. What do we know about Mr. Nairn's death?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, Rory received his first dose of the Pfizer vaccine on November the 5th. It was something of a spur-of-the-moment decision, and he attended a walk-up clinic at a pharmacy which has name suppression. That night he reported having heart flutters, a condition he had never experienced before, but he put it down to stress as he had a lot on his plate, having recently bought a home and planning his upcoming wedding. Less than a fortnight later, he was experiencing the heart flutters again. He told his partner he would visit his GP the next day. Unfortunately, after awaking early in the morning, he collapsed in the bathroom of his home and couldn't be revived by emergency services when they arrived. A pathologist determined he died as a result of myocarditis, and the COVID-19 Vaccine Independent Safety Monitoring Board determined the vaccine likely caused the condition.
So, Timothy, witnesses that have been heard at the inquest so far, what have they had to say? Who's been speaking?
Yeah, this morning the inquest heard from Mr. Nian's partner, Ashley Wilson. She detailed Mr. Nian's hesitancy about getting the vaccine, but she says he was concerned about the restrictions the mandates would impose on his life, particularly as the couple intended on getting married in March and didn't want their vaccine status to interfere with their plans. She said he had never experienced heart problems before. Ms. Wilson said she found a screenshot on Mr. Nian's phone following his death detailing myocarditis and the risk following vaccination. The screenshot was taken in the hours before his death, and she says if the warning about the risk following vaccination was more urgent, it may have saved his life. The inquest also heard from Brett Nian, Rory's father. He recalled Rory raising the feeling in his chest in the days following his vaccination. Brett Nian knew of the risk of myocarditis and raised it with his son. The vaccinator who administered the vaccine also gave evidence. She says it wasn't standard practice to draw attention to myocarditis at the time of Rory's vaccination, as it was a rare side effect. However, that changed immediately following Mr. Nian's death. The owner of the pharmacy also gave evidence this afternoon and admitted she missed an earlier warning in August about the risk of myocarditis due to the Pfizer vaccine following the death of a woman from the condition.
And so, Timothy, who else are you expecting to give evidence?
The First Minister of Health witness took the stand late this afternoon and will continue her evidence tomorrow morning. Further witnesses are expected from the Ministry, Southern DHB, now obviously Te Whatu Ora, and MedSafe, as well as pathologist Dr. Nolene Hung.
Thank you for that, Tim. That's Timothy Brown joining us live from Dunedin. And myocarditis is rare following vaccination, with international data showing 1 to 13 cases per 100,000 vaccine doses. It's also treatable, especially if symptoms are picked up early. Pakistan's foreign minister has described the level of devastation caused by flooding as a climate-induced humanitarian disaster of epic proportions. So far, floods have killed more than 1,000 people, a third of them children, and affected 30 million people. The minister, Bilawal Bhutto Sardari, says Pakistan is one of the top 10 climate-stressed nations. The BBC's Pumsa Filani is in Sindh province, one of the worst affected provinces.
Millions of people have been displaced in Pakistan, livelihoods destroyed, and communities at risk of hunger. In the north, floods are still raging, sweeping away everything in their path. In the last 24 hours, military helicopters have rescued scores of villagers in remote areas where the roads have collapsed.
Along this busy motorway, about 20 minutes outside of Sakar, hundreds of makeshift homes are dotted across this section of the road. It's home to people who have been displaced, who had lived along the Indus River, one of the major rivers here in Pakistan that's been overflowing for weeks and dumped water on people's homes and leaving them completely submerged. Now, in this community, walking through, I see there aren't even any tents yet. People have been living here for weeks, they tell me, but they've got nothing. They have used plastic, some are using blankets, some are using branches from palm trees, and they've woven and tied those together into a canopy for some kind of covering. Here is Miran Mai.
There was a lot of rain and water came up to our shoulder level. Our house was swept away, our kids were crying. We didn't get any help or rations since we came here.
Local aid agencies are overstretched and under-resourced. Abdullah Fadil is from UNICEF and says they are doing all they can.
And the United Nations is actually sending an appeal tomorrow to the tune of $160 million for the life-saving immediate needs, just to respond people's water needs, health needs, nutrition needs, and shelter. This is what we're trying to focus now at the moment. This is the need at the moment.
Government officials here in Pakistan have said they are completely overwhelmed and they've been pleading for help from the international community. Here on the ground, people say they are seeing very slow relief efforts. There are communities that are yet to receive any aid because the roads leading to them have been cut off. People there are having to come to their own rescue.
And that's the BBC's Pumsa Filani with that report. It is almost 20 to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let's get to some of your feedback now. GST on KiwiSaver fees has really annoyed you. Labor promised no new taxes, this listener says. Sally wonders, do you think GST will come off fresh food to offset? This one, the government should be encouraging savings, not adding taxes compared to other countries, the US, Oz, etc. New Zealand savings are overtaxed. Another person says increasing tax on pensions and not introducing a capital gains tax will just fuel the housing crisis. People will put their money into property to get tax-free capital gains instead of pensions. A very bad look for a government that wants people to be well provided for in their old age. Another says worst time to slap a new unsignalled tax on KiwiSaver. It's KiwiSaver fees that have already taken a huge pounding this year. When the KiwiSaver providers are urging people not to lose their nerve and withdraw funds, could be people will move back to their banks and term deposits. And this one, before we move on, Lisa, I've been trying to get money out of my KiwiSaver to pay my mortgage, so I've been unemployed for over 2 years, but can't get much, $4,000, because the supervisor has to look after the money for retirement, will possibly lose money, and now they want to take money. And homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program. Get in touch about the GST on KiwiSaver fees, ram raids, officers being diverted to security checks, basically, to get that $6 million fund from the government out to businesses at risk. Don't forget, you can text us on 2101 and you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time to head to the headlines. Ane amarama mina pita pita kōrero.
Thanks, Lisa. Further allegations of public shaming at Gloriavale by another former member have been heard in court this afternoon. Pearl Vella told the Employment Court this afternoon shaming people was a driving force at the community. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says it would be advisable for the Greens co-leader Marama Davidson to remove her social media posts promoting Whittaker's chocolate as it's against cabinet rules. A heated dispute between a toilet paper manufacturer and its employees has been escalated to the Employment Relations Authority. Essity is seeking $500,000 in compensation from its own workers who are striking over low pay. A former Sydney High School teacher and rugby league player Chris Dawson has been found guilty of murdering his wife Lynette Dawson in 1982. The story gained worldwide attention after the successful podcast The Teacher's Pet. A pharmacist says prevention is key for hay fever sufferers this pollen season. The Asthma and Respiratory Foundation is warning people with allergies and asthma that an intense season of pollen production could lie ahead. And in Ghana, a man has been mauled to death by a lion after he climbed into a zoo enclosure. Wildlife authorities suspect the man may have planned to steal 2 rare white lion cubs, which have become a big draw card at the Accra Zoo since their birth last November. It's 5:42 now.
Let's be accurate. Kia ora rā e ho. Around 90 New Zealand troops are on their way to the United Kingdom to train Ukrainian soldiers how to survive on the battlefield. They are the second contingent of New Zealand soldiers to go to Europe. The Defence Force maintains the troops leaving today will be training, not fighting, as they continue to look into how many have gone to Ukraine on leave. Our reporter Haisa Almeida and cameraman Nick Monroe have more.
A line of soldiers with backpacks on boarded the Air Force plane at the Whenuapai Auckland base this morning, destined for the UK. They will be training Ukrainian infantry recruits in 2 5-week courses. The troops will learn techniques on how to survive in a war zone and how to become more lethal in combat within the law of war. The Commander Joint Forces Rear Admiral Jim Gilmore says the training would give the Ukrainian army a better understanding of how to survive war.
It's really a moment of pride for me as the commander of our joint forces to recognise that our professional soldiers are being used in this way to instil a sense of confidence in the Ukrainian army's new recruits for themselves.
Last week, Corporal Dominic Ebelin was on leave without pay when he was killed while fighting Russian troops in eastern Ukraine. Rear Admiral Jim Gilmore says the 90 troops are joining another 30 who have been in the UK since April. He says they will be part of the contingent for the duration of the trip, conducting training with no leave without pay.
The instructions for our people that are heading offshore is they will not be on leave without pay and therefore subject to leadership within this contingent. I don't expect that to be an issue for this trip.
Rear Admiral Jim Gilmore says leave without pay is normally taken when recruits are planning to leave the force and not something that happens while deployed on an operation.
It's something that is when our armed forces personnel decide to take a break from their careers to try something else. It is not something that happens whilst you're deployed on operation.
The Defence Minister Penny Henare says all New Zealand citizens are advised not to travel to Ukraine because it is an active war zone.
We've made it quite clear that there is a no travel notice for Ukraine and that'll still stand, and I can't see that coming away anytime soon.
The New Zealand Army contingency is expected to stay in the UK until mid-November.
And the video version of that story, filmed by cameraman Nick Monroe, will be on our web page. NASA says technical problems meant it had to cancel today's planned launch of the world's most powerful rocket on an unmanned test flight to the moon. The US Space Agency is working to address the issues that emerged in the hours leading up to the launch at Cape Canaveral in Florida. NASA stresses it was right to take a cautious approach. There are alternative dates for the launch, the earliest of which is Saturday. The BBC's Jonathan Amos reports.
This is Artemis Launch Control with an update. Launch Director Charlie Blackwell-Thompson has called a scrub for today.
In the end, they simply had too many issues to work through and not enough time to fix them. First, heavy showers delayed the task of filling the rocket with its propellants. For a short while, controllers even thought they might have a crack in the rocket. Concern on that front was quickly resolved. But what eventually stopped the launch was an engine that refused to go down to its operating temperature. To add insult to injury, thick cloud then moved over the Kennedy Space Center, a big red no-go constraint. The scrub will have disappointed the hundreds of thousands of spectators who'd gathered on local beaches and causeways to see the most powerful rocket in 50 years fly skyward. But NASA Administrator Bill Nelson, himself a one-time astronaut, said the cautious approach was the right one.
We don't launch until it's right. And I think it's just illustrative that this is a very complicated machine, a very complicated system, and all those things have to work. And you don't want to light the candle until it's ready to go.
The big question now is whether the troublesome engine problem can be sorted out on the pad. Worryingly, this engine played up during countdown rehearsals. If they have to roll the rocket back to Kennedy's assembly building to swap out the engine, it'll introduce several weeks of delay.
That report from the BBC. It is 14 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The fallout following the FBI raid on Donald Trump's Florida home continues. The US intelligence community is conducting a damage assessment of documents taken from the former president's home to determine if any harm was done to national security. Mr. Trump still had 148 unique classified documents in his possession after he left office. 25 of those were marked top secret. And as CNN's Sarah Murray reports, many Republicans are demanding more transparency, claiming the Justice Department overreached.
The Justice Department suggesting it's already well underway in digging through boxes of documents seized from Mar-a-Lago.
Their point is well taken, which is this is too late. We're already looking at this material and
we've got a process in place to protect it.
In a new court filing, DOJ says it has identified a limited set of materials that could contain attorney-client privileged information. The progress report coming after former President Donald Trump's team asked a judge for a special master to oversee the review of evidence uncovered in the search. This as the fallout continues over how Trump handled classified documents after leaving office.
This guy, we now know, 184 classified documents, 25 of them top secret. And by the way, countries that want to do us harm want to see these documents.
Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines telling Congress officials are conducting a damage assessment of the documents seized from Mar-a-Lago, including an assessment of the potential risk to national security that would result from the disclosure of relevant documents. DOJ saying in its court filing, it's working alongside intelligence officials to facilitate a review of classified materials.
This is disgusting in my mind, and like this, no president should act this way, obviously.
Some of Trump's closest allies, meantime, are leaping to his defense, like South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham.
I'll say this. If there's a prosecution of Donald Trump for mishandling classified information after the Clinton debacle,
who suggested a Trump indictment would set political tensions aflame,
there'll be riots in the streets.
While New Hampshire Republican Governor Chris Sununu questions the timing of the Mar-a-Lago search.
Former President Trump has been out of office for going on 2 years now. Why? I think this is a coincidence, just happening a few months before the midterm elections and all that sort of thing. So, this is unprecedented.
Republican Senator Roy Blunt also raising concerns about the timing, but admitting Trump should have returned the documents immediately.
I understand he turned over a lot of documents. He should have turned over all of them. I imagine he knows that very well now as well.
And back home now, Armageddon by name and potentially by nature if the massive pop culture event can't find a venue. It's been left in limbo as a dispute over who can use the Auckland showgrounds where it's normally held rumbles on. The trust that runs the venue for the benefit of Cornwall Park wanted to lease it exclusively to a film company, but the court found the site is protected for trade shows, exhibitions and other entertainment. Yet it still lies unused. And joining us now is Bill Garrett's director of the Armageddon Expos. Kia ora, Bill. Who or what's stopping you getting into the showgrounds?
At the moment, the showgrounds itself is just empty. So I know there's still court cases underway, but it's just dragging and dragging and dragging. And I know the entire events industry, or certainly a core part of it, is just waiting for this thing to be resolved so we can get to work. I'm literally sitting. I've got a floor plan. I've got advertising, I've got guests, I've got everything lined up. We're ready to just pull the final trigger, and yet instead I'm sitting around just waiting because there's only so long we can stretch it out.
Yeah, Bill, how long can you wait? Because obviously this is a ton of people, you need a massive venue. How long before you have to pull the pin?
Well, I'm eating a bunch of costs. I mean, essentially a couple of grand a day just sitting around at the moment. But honestly, I've probably got another week, maybe a little longer, before we have to do it. We have to cancel because there's no way to. There's no way we can keep going if we don't have a proper official venue sorted. And there's nowhere else we can do this. And for me, that's more my gripe. Where it comes to the fate of the venue, that's in the trust's hands. And that's just one of those things that's going to happen. And it's unfortunate, and I might not like it, but I accept that's going to be, they own it, they get to choose what happens with it. And I've generally kept myself out of who's going to end up managing it, whether it be one side or the other, because I just want to do a show. My point that I've been sort of made recently is more that it should never have got to this point. I do shows in virtually every main city in New Zealand, and I'm doing a show in Christchurch in December at the new Tapai Convention Centre, which is a magnificent venue, and it's perfect for Christchurch. It's not too big, it's not too small, it'll do everything you want it to do for the city. And the fact that there is not a purpose-built venue in Auckland that can do any massive events is something that we should never have got to this point. And for the council to just turn up...
Sorry, Bill, but what are the economic consequences of that then? If a show like yours, and there are others in the queue also waiting, so what are the flow-on effects for business in Auckland?
Well, Armageddon, we spend over $1 million just doing the show. And then we figure our footprint is about 14 million, probably more now. But that was the last time we did a check. We had a $14 million footprint when we do the show. That's for exhibitors, for companies that sell stuff through, food, catering, hotel, accommodation, wages, everything. And that's just us. That's us over a week. Now, the home show preparation takes a month, and the amount of companies that fly up and do that's 4 weeks worth of stuff. The pet show, which is supposed to be on the weekend before us, that's a smaller footprint, but still one. I mean, you're talking just between those three shows, I would say $40 to $50 million gone from the Auckland regional economy.
So you accept that the Trust has control of this situation, but you mentioned the council there. So what do you want, the mayor or someone to wade into this?
Well, they should be involved. I mean, they've pretty much just said, not our problem, they're separate from us. But that's very easy, but when they had the option to fix this problem decades ago, and instead they passed it to the trust to say, here's a trust that can run it and can look after the venue, but that essentially abstains any authority in terms of holding events or bringing big things to the region. We needed a bigger venue than the showgrounds. It's a good venue, but we needed a bigger venue than that already. And yet we haven't. So we have to deal with what we've got. And the fact that we're sitting around for the last 2 months with an empty venue is, I wouldn't necessarily put it down to the trust or the companies trying to work in, because they're doing what's best for them. I would put it down to the fact that the council's just gone, not our problem, and we're left sitting here holding the bag.
Really appreciate your time, Bill. Hey, just while we've been talking, you've had a four-legged friend who made a cameo appearance. So just for my curiosity, before you head off, what's your dog's name?
Wilbur.
Wilbur. Fantastic.
He's a Border Collie Springer Spaniel. He's lovely.
Great to talk to you, Bill. Appreciate your time. That is Bill Garrett, who's the director of the Armageddon Expos there, with a cameo from Wilbur. Palmerston North has a poo problem. Every evening, thousands of birds fly into the centre of the city to sleep for the night, and their droppings fall on unsuspecting parked cars and pedestrians. Manawatu reporter Jimmy Allingham braved the shower to bring you this story.
It's an impressive sound and sight every evening. Starlings by their thousands flocking to the square in the middle of Palmerston North. But it comes at a cost, as inner-city business owner Catherine Russ explains.
The main problem with the pooing on the cars is when everybody comes in to park up and go into the restaurants for dinner. And if you're not from here, really, it's a nasty surprise.
Catherine Russ, a founder of clothing label Porkchop Hill, says customers often mention the bird droppings across the road from her shop.
If it rains or the bird poo gets wet, it really does create an awful smell in the air. But we're not here in the evenings, which is that's when the cars really get bombed.
Catherine Russ suggests pruning the trees to keep them back from the footpaths. 5 years ago, the City Council paid about $50,000 for bird scarers, but now the birds pretty much ignore them, and nobody spoken to by RNZ wants to see the inner city's green canopy cut down, robbing people of much-needed summer shade.
Well, what are you going to do, You know that not to park there, otherwise your car's going to be pelted, They're birds. They don't know no different.
I don't really know what they can do about it. Because, obviously not take the trees out.
I think we just keep it so that we can have the bird, because I love the bird. Yeah, I love the sound when they're coming here.
Kathy Diva Todd from the Palmerston North City Council says bird poo is regularly water blasted off the pavement. She says other measures to deal with the problem are being looked at, including moving the footpaths away from the trees.
What we've found over time with any measure that we've put in place is they're only short-term. The birds soon get to realise that it's not really a threat to them. Generations and generations of birds have been brought up roosting in those trees, and we're not going to change that behaviour overnight.
However, there's no easy fix.
We will continue to try and work to disturb the birds with the bird scarers. And the other thing we are looking at is water sprinklers and things that really discourage them from being in the trees that are close to the edge of the square. In the middle of the square, they roost in all those trees as well. Nobody really notices it because all the guano falls onto the grass below.
Some businesses say the droppings do put people off, but the spectacular sound of starlings will continue to inspire awe and frustration depending on where you park your car.
Isn't it lucky to get pooped on by a bird, or is that just to make you feel better when it happens? Hey, let us know if you've got any thoughts on how to solve that problem. Text us on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Uber drivers and other gig economy workers in Australia are hoping their work conditions could soon improve with a potential shake-up of the sector. The Transport Union is lobbying the new Labor government to introduce industry standards. The ABC's Isabel Rowe reports.
Uber and Menulog promote themselves as the giants of modern food delivery, but their workers often feel powerless.
There's no transparency, there's no job security, there's nothing at all. And we are just juggling our life, driving maybe like in 80k zone or 100k zone, just for the $5.
Nabin Adhikari delivers food for multiple companies. He's fronting a push from the transport sector to regulate his industry.
We never know how we are getting paid, how the system is for the driver, what are the rights for us. It's going to hit not only the transport sector, but other sectors.
The Transport Workers Union and a transport industry body have signed an agreement to lobby for a new industry watchdog. It has the support of big transport operators like Coles and Woolworths, as well as gig economy companies Uber and DoorDash. Union Secretary Michael Caine says it's an unusual collaboration.
This round table provides this government with what they asked for, which is consensus between disparate interests in a very, very significant industry in Australia that accounts for 9% of our gross domestic product.
Secretary of the Australian Road Transport Industrial Organisation, Peter Anderson, represents employers and says the industry must have a minimum wage and conditions.
You cannot maintain the standards and expectations of the community with the structures that are in place. We need reform. The industry needs reform. And we've never had a better chance for that reform than now. We need an independent body that will govern the processes upon which people will be treated fairly, businesses will be sustainable.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Marama Tipole. The government plans to charge GST on top of KiwiSaver fees as part of a tax bill introduced to Parliament today. It's estimated to bring in $225 million a year in tax from 2026 and is expected to have a massive effect on the amount of money in KiwiSaver accounts. Deloitte tax specialist Alan Bulow has told Checkpoint KiwiSaver members will save a lot less money as a result.
One investor, for example, after 25 years, this change would drop the level of savings that they had by the end of the period of over $20,000. This is going to be a pretty significant change.
Alan Bulow says while it is GST, KiwiSaver members he's spoken to view this as a new tax. The Revenue Minister says the law change could mean more tax revenue for the government in coming years, but has been done for consistency. David Parker was asked if this would mean less money in New Zealanders' KiwiSaver funds and more into the government's coffers.
That payment is it's transitioned into over quite a long period of time. I think it's 3 years from memory. And over that time, the market will respond accordingly.
Financial Markets Authority modelling shows the law change could reduce KiwiSaver fund balances by $103 billion by 2070. A hospitality worker says it was shocking to see armed police just metres from the entrance to her Christchurch business this morning. Police blocked off sections of Hereford Street and Stanmore Road this morning after a man was shot near the corner about 11:15am. A manhunt is still underway. Urmila from Mumbai Local Takeaway says they've been in the area for a year and haven't seen anything like it before. The cordon was taken down shortly after 2 o'clock this afternoon. Police say the shooting victim is in a serious condition in Christchurch Hospital. An Indian community leader and Auckland hospitality business owner says crime and poverty is still rampant in the central city. Fed-up business owners have met to demand action from the police and local authorities over the surge in burglaries. Shakespeare Hotel owner Sunny Kushal says ram raids and burglaries have skyrocketed and business owners fear for their safety.
What we have got is a gritty reality. Ram raids, retail crime, homelessness and drugs are rampant. This is not hyperbole, it's sadly the fact.
Sunny Kushal says the Police Minister needs to be clear with business owners about how they can access the Crime Prevention Fund. Meanwhile, police are targeting support for businesses most vulnerable to ram raids. Nationwide, there's been a 400% increase in ram raids in 5 years. A $6 million support fund was launched by the government in May, but just 5 stores in Auckland have received security upgrades. Acting Assistant Commissioner Dave Lynch has told Checkpoint more staff will be tasked with approving upgrades.
We need to prioritise where we're going to get the most effect in relation to using that funding, and that needs to start with those that are considered the most vulnerable. Businesses that are in a general location, which could be regarded as a hotspot, would certainly be assessed.
Dave Lynch says 21 assessments have so far been made and police are working with the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment to get more done as fast as possible. A company that locked workers out of a Kawerau toilet paper mill hopes to resolve their pay dispute by the end of this week. Hygiene manufacturer Essity is seeking $500,000 in damages from its own employees. Felix Walton has more.
Essity will meet with the Pulp and Paper Workers Union on Thursday and Friday this week. The two groups have been at an impasse for 3 weeks over pay complaints. The union refused Essity's initial offer of a 3% pay increase, demanding 7% to match inflation. But Essity, which employs 200 people in the town, claims its offer is fair.
Further allegations of public shaming at Gloriavale by another former member have been heard in court this afternoon. Pearl Bala is the second woman to argue years of domestic work in the Christian community was as an employee rather than as a volunteer. Gloriavale's leaders deny that the women were employees. Mrs. Valla told the employment court this afternoon shaming people was a driving force at the community.
When I was younger, I remember one of the girls on my team accidentally burnt the porridge for breakfast. She had to stand out at the meal table in front of the whole community and apologise. She was just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing.
A former high school teacher in Sydney, Chris Dawson, has been found guilty of murdering his wife in 1982. The verdict comes 40 years after the disappearance of Lynette Dawson from their Bayview home in Sydney. Justice Ian Harrison says he believes Dawson's infatuation with the family's babysitter, with whom he shared a relationship with, led to him resolving to kill his wife. The high-profile story became the subject of a podcast called The Teacher's Pet, which has had more than 30 million downloads. Officials are trialling new methods to minimise problematic bird droppings plaguing inner-city Palmerston North. Every evening, thousands of starlings flock to the square to sleep for the night, leaving footpaths and parked cars covered in poo. City Council Group Manager for Parks and Logistics, Kathy Dever-Todd, says new ways to deal with the problem are being looked at, including moving the footpaths away from the trees and using sprinklers. She says footpaths are regularly water blasted. It's 6 minutes past 6. All Blacks captain Sam Cane admits there is heaps of pressure ahead of the Rugby Championship rematch with Argentina in Hamilton. The championship is the closest it's been in years between the 4 participating nations of New Zealand, Australia, Argentina and South Africa. The Wallabies and Pumas are leading the standings, and Cane says an improvement in the All Blacks' discipline should help them pick up their second win of the competition on Saturday.
I don't know if it's ever been even as it has ever been 2-2 for everyone. So there's that pressure, there's the external pressure, and there's the internal pressure that we put on ourselves that we're not happy with how we fronted up last week.
And first five Beauden Barrett believes he could be back for the All Blacks this week after recovering from a neck injury. Serena Williams has advanced to the second round of the US Tennis Open with a hard-fought win over Danka Kovinic of Montenegro. The victory over the 80th ranked Kovinic was just Williams' second win this year. Meanwhile, in the men's draw, Greek fourth seed Stefanos Tsitsipas has been knocked out of the Grand Slam after suffering a shock defeat to Colombian qualifier Daniel Galán in the first round. And the Wellington Phoenix have finalised the men's squad for the next A-League season with the signing of Polish striker Oskar Zawada on a 2-year deal. Zawada will join up with his new teammates in Sydney tonight as the team prepares for tomorrow's Australia's Cup quarter-final against Macarthur FC. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Harrison Christian tells the story of the remote Australian garrison that faced the might of the Japanese army in Papua New Guinea in early 1942. Tony Stamp samples new music from Aotearoa, along with the Canadian outfit Kiwi Jr. And Patrick Phelps from Minerals West Coast has been thinking about the Lorax, the Dr. Seuss character who spoke for the trees. Perhaps he thinks the miners do too. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, afternoon news at 7 on RNZ National.
RNZ National, funded through New Zealand On Air. Lisa Owen and Checkpoint back in a minute, but right now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel fine, apart from a few showers, mainly about Coromandel and north of Orewa. Waikato to Wellington, also Bay of Plenty, the Central High Country and Wairarapa. Generally fine, one or two afternoon, finish afternoon, haven't we? So one or two showers possible inland and some frosty areas for tomorrow morning. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloudy periods with isolated showers, clearing to become fine about Hawke's Bay. For Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with variable high cloud. Nelson, the odd shower about Golden Bay, otherwise fine. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, mostly cloudy with a few showers. Rain developing about Westland and Fiordland tomorrow, heavy at times. For Otago and Southland, mainly fine with high cloud. A possible shower about Dunedin and Clutha. Scattered rain for tomorrow evening. And for the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with a few light showers clearing tomorrow. It's 6:09, Lisa.
Nā mihi e ho, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A former Sydney High School teacher and rugby league player, Chris Dawson, has been found guilty of murdering his wife in 1982. The verdict comes 40 years after the disappearance of Lynette Dawson from their Bayview home in Sydney. The case made international headlines after becoming the subject of a podcast, The Teacher's Pet, which has had almost 30 million downloads. Justice Ian Harrison says he believes Dawson's infatuation with the family's babysitter led to his resolve to kill his wife. Here's the judge delivering his verdict.
I'm satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that the only rational inference that the circumstances enable me to draw is that Lynette Dawson died on about 8 January 1982 as the result of a conscious and voluntary act committed by Mr Dawson with the intention of causing her death. Christopher Michael Dawson on the charge that on or about 8 January 1982 at Bayview or elsewhere in the state of New South Wales, you did murder Lynette Dawson. I find you guilty.
The verdict follows a lengthy hearing today in Sydney. The trial was judge alone, given the high-profile nature of the case. The ABC's Jamil Wells has more on the judge's verdict.
He found that Chris Dawson had lied to police. He found that Chris Dawson had lied about receiving phone calls from his wife, and he found that a lot of the alleged sightings of Lynette Dawson after she disappeared in 1982 were just fabrications. Lynette Dawson's family was in the public gallery. They all wore pink ribbons, little pink bows pinned to their jackets in memory of her. There were also supporters of Chris Dawson. There are a lot of people that he had played football with over the years and some of his family members. The public gallery was full. The court actually had to open up the Banco court, which is the big court next door to it. There were a lot of court watchers very interested in this case because it has been around for almost 40 years. This particular murder trial followed two inquests, and after those two inquests, two coroners recommended to the DPP that charges be laid against someone for murdering Lynette Dawson, but they weren't. And then this case took a bit of a twist in 2015 when a new police officer took over running it. He found some evidence, some statements by Chris Dawson, and then by the end of 2019, by about Christmas 2019, Chris Dawson had been charged with murder.
Chris Dawson's been taken into custody where he'll stay unless a bail application is approved. A major counter-offensive is underway in the south of Ukraine. A Ukrainian military official says Ukraine has taken back 4 villages in the Kherson region after breaking through Russia's first line of defence. It follows weeks of Ukrainian attacks at cutting off Russian forces there from their main supply routes. CNN's Melissa Bell reports.
6 months ago, Russian forces rolled through Ukraine's south, winning swathes of land. Today, Ukraine started the campaign to claw back Kherson.
And this is the long-awaited counter-offensive operation, which was started today at 7 a.m. with a shelling and missiles attack.
It's a sign of growing Ukrainian confidence and strength on the battlefield. But further north, a nightmare scenario playing out. Shells landing just miles from Europe's largest nuclear plant. Zaporizhzhia has become a flashpoint in the war in Ukraine, with both sides blaming the other for the artillery strikes that threatened the site and neighbouring towns. 9 people were injured in shelling in the nearby town of Enerhodar on Sunday night, according to a Russian-backed official. Last week, shells landed about 100 metres from Zaporizhzhia's reactors. CNN is unable to verify who's responsible for the shelling. Ukraine claims the site's been turned into a military base. Satellite images today show Russian armoured vehicles hidden by a reactor. A demilitarized zone not under discussion, according to the Kremlin. But some hope is perhaps on the way. Early Monday, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, tweeted that a delegation of experts would arrive in Zaporizhzhia later this week. They arrived in Kyiv today. The mission of 14 experts headed by Grossi, one of the few diplomatic agreements to have come out of the war so far.
I think now there is general recognition that we need to be there. We need to be there soon. Kyiv accepts it. Moscow accepts it.
In Zaporizhzhia, power has been a concern, with nearby fires twice briefly cutting the plant's external electricity that powers critical functions last Thursday. A total loss of power would be disastrous.
If we have cut of power supply from outside, and after that diesel generator stopped, then there will be completely the same scenario like at Fukushima.
Grossi says that currently safety systems in place at the power plant remain operational, with radioactivity levels within normal range. Even so, authorities are not taking any chances. In Ukrainian-controlled territory, exercises this month in case of nuclear fallout. Near Zaporizhzhia, locals have been collecting iodine pills to defend against the effects of a possible radiation leak. In a land that's no stranger to nuclear disaster, prudence is worth its weight in gold.
It's 6:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Iraq has imposed a nationwide curfew after supporters of the influential Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr stormed the government palace. The latest unrest was sparked when al-Sadr announced he was quitting politics. Iraqi medical sources say 12 people have been killed and more than 80 injured in clashes in the protected green zone in Baghdad. Deutsche Welle's Aditya Sharma has this story.
Supporters of Iraq's Shia cleric Muqtada al-Sadr breached Baghdad's heavily fortified green zone, an area home to ministries and embassies. They soon overran the government palace.
Our revolution is solely an Iraqi one. It's not Sadrist. This is an Iraqi revolution. Iraq should be returned to its people.
Our demands are to dissolve parliament and to hold the corrupt to account, and we say to al-Sadr, we will sacrifice for you. Victory is ours.
While they were inside, many were seen lounging in meeting rooms used by Iraqi heads of state and cooling off in a swimming pool in the garden. They were soon driven out by security forces using tear gas and gunshots. The UN mission to Iraq, as well as the United States, called on all sides for restraint. The flare-up of violence follows months of political deadlock in Iraq. Muqtada al-Sadr's movement, the Sadrist bloc, was the biggest winner in October's election, but he failed to form a government that excluded his Shia rivals close to Iran. He withdrew his lawmakers from parliament in June. His followers have since been staging a sit-in outside the parliament, calling for fresh elections. While this isn't the first time the influential cleric has withdrawn from politics, the current deadlock in Iraq appears harder to resolve than in the past.
Adisha Sharma reporting for Deutsche Welle. More than 1,000 Palestinians fear that Israel's army will soon force them to leave their homes in the south of the occupied West Bank. In May, the Israeli High Court sanctioned plans to expel them to make way for Israeli military training in an area known as Masafa Yatta. If the mass eviction goes ahead, UN experts have warned that it could amount to a war crime. The BBC's Yolande Niel reports.
Israeli police pushes back.
You see, now they are demolishing.
In seconds, a Palestinian home is gone. Israel says a family built here illegally. This part of the occupied West Bank is under full Israeli control. It's virtually impossible for Palestinians here to get Israeli permits, so they build without them.
So these are all their possessions, and the family that was living in this house, Abu Muhammad's relatives, they don't even know that their house has been demolished because they were away at a wedding. No one's been able to call them and get in touch.
No, but I think it's smarter to go this way.
Oh, that way?
With the Israeli army blocking off the roads, I joined Bassel al-Adra and other anti-demolition activists racing across the hilltop to follow the Israeli military convoy. There are scuffles with shepherds as soldiers and the bulldozer reach their shelter.
So they're taking down the animal pen. These are workers that are doing it. They're working with the military. And then they're using the bulldozer here just to put the metal poles in and carry them away. Everything's going to be confiscated so that the shepherds can't easily rebuild.
It was established during the Second Intifada.
So it's been here for
Next, Bassel al-Adra, who's from Tawani in Masafa Yatta, takes me to see the Israeli settlements and outposts on the outskirts of his village. They're seen as illegal under international law, but Israel disagrees. He sees a double standard.
These settlers come here, steal our land as Palestinians, digging on it and build their homes. I mean, the state supports them doing that and providing the infrastructure for the settlers on my land, but the same state and the same government is like approaching us from here by demolishing our homes, schools and water well and roads.
I drive on to another part of Masafa Yatta.
This sign up here is telling us we're about to enter into a firing area, an Israeli military zone. It says danger, well, entrance is forbidden.
Hundreds of Palestinians face eviction from this area after losing a 2-decade-long legal battle. The Israeli military doesn't agree to an interview, but points out that the Israeli Supreme Court ruled this had been legitimately set up as an army training area and that it was previously uninhabited.
Trying to tread carefully, not to slip. This is where a family lives, right in the hillside.
I head into a cave to meet a couple, Naaman and Suhair. Naaman's grandfather created this living place, cool from the heat outside, long before he was born.
مرحبا.
ولو يشوفوا الجيش بأخذها. أخذوا عدة خلايا كمان من الناس بخطوه.
Yeah. So people are worried about losing their solar panels from the army.
It's basic inside. Anything built here could be demolished by the Israeli military.
Pajamas, little pajamas. Oh.
Suhair, who's pregnant, shows me the baby clothes she's collected, but tells me she's afraid.
What's the future for you?
What future? Suhair replies. We're living in fear. We have no future. Nothing. I leave Suhair preparing lunch in her kitchen. If this mass eviction goes ahead, it could be one of the biggest in decades. The UN warns it could be a war crime. But for those struggling to stay here, that's little reassurance.
He's been described as the loneliest man in the world and now the last remaining member of an indigenous group in the Tanaru area in Brazil, close to the Bolivian border, has died. The BBC's Amelia Clark reports.
He had spent the past 26 years in total isolation as the lone survivor of his tribe. The majority were thought to have been killed in the 1970s by ranchers who wanted to encroach on indigenous land. The country's constitution says native people have a right to their territory. To keep this protection in place, government agents needed to prove the man was alive. So, the Brazilian Indigenous Affairs Agency had been monitoring his existence. The authorities hadn't seen him since a chance encounter in the jungle in 2018, which they caught on film. But one way they knew he was still there were the deep holes he dug, thought to trap animals and act as hiding places from intruders. The large ditches gave the man his name, Man of the Hole. It's believed he died of natural causes at around 60 years old. His body was found last week in a hammock outside his undisturbed straw hut.
The discovery of an illegal Indonesian fishing camp on Australia's northern coast has prompted biosecurity and border concerns. There's been a surge of Indonesian crews entering Australian waters to harvest marine life, but this is the first evidence of them actually reaching the coast in recent years. The ABC's Erin Park has more.
When the ABC visited Niwallara Island in the remote North Kimberley last year, the national park was peaceful and pristine. The Goini traditional owners sampled bush fruits and helped archaeologists locate the remnants of seafood processing camps that were set up by visiting Asian fishermen in the 1800s.
In those days, some of our people used to talk the Indonesian way, talk in their language.
At that point, there was no hint of what was to come. A 21st century visit by Indonesian fishermen who appear to have entered the North Kimberley Marine Park earlier this year and set up camp on the island.
I've never ever seen them on the land or camping spots like this. This is obviously someone's come in, set up camp for a week and dried their fish and then chuffed off again.
Steve Hinge and his wife discovered the campsite during a visit to Niwallara, also known as Sir Graham Moore Island, in May. The veteran skipper, who ran commercial fishing boats in northern waters for 2 decades, says it was a shocking sight.
In the corner there was a pile of rubbish, and it ended up being a lot of Indonesian products like water bottles, cigarettes, noodles and all sorts of things. And up on the rocks there was dried fish, a dried shark and various other bits and pieces to show that someone's a day camp, so it would have gone on for a long time, I think.
Steve Hinge reported the scene to federal authorities when they returned to shore and provided dozens of photos.
The authorities have obviously been doing a good job over the years keeping illegal fishing and incursions like this back, but there's obviously been a breakdown or there's a weakness in the system to have allowed this to occur. I mean, I did report it to the Border Force but haven't heard anything back, so I've got no idea what they've done about it.
The number of Indonesian fishing boats illegally entering Australian waters has surged during the COVID pandemic, with tourism charters raising concerns about piracy and turtles found killed on remote atolls. But this is the first evidence of a crew reaching the Australian coast during the period. Local MP Neil Thompson says it shows worrying weaknesses in border security.
The challenge here is the number of boats that are starting to come down and the brazen activity that is going on along our coast. This is the problem because it poses such a huge biosecurity threat. It also impacts on our fragile and beautiful environment, and it poses the national security risk. We must do more to stop this happening.
The Australian Border Force did not answer questions about the campsite, but said in a statement that it coordinates regular patrols in the area. The WA Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions said it would soon be doing fauna surveys on Niwallara that would help identify any foreign species. Steve Hinge is already planning his next northern voyage and is hoping surveillance will have improved.
I mean, next thing you go down there, there'll be a few bits of tin and they'll be having a family there if we don't keep an eye on them. But I don't think we'll ever get to that level, but it is a concern and it's something that could grow quite easily if it's not clamped down pretty quick.
Local MP Neil Thompson ending that report. And to Europe now, Air France has suspended 2 pilots who became involved in some type of physical fighting inside the cockpit during a flight across Europe. CNN's Scott McLean has more.
This actually happened back in June. This was a flight from Geneva, Switzerland to Paris, France, a little over an hour flight time. And there was some kind of a disagreement in the cockpit which flared up into a physical altercation. We don't know what kind of physical altercation, but in a written statement, the airline described it in a much more benign way, saying that the pilots exchanged inappropriate gestures, though they have also confirmed that the pilots were not giving each other the finger. This was something that turned physical. Now, the airline, Air France, says that the flight continued on normally, that the issue was resolved. It's not clear when or how Air France actually found out about what had happened, but it has gone ahead and suspended the two pilots while it looks into it. This is not the only safety mishap for Air France in the news lately. Last week, the French Air Safety Investigative Agency, called BEA, released a report on an incident that happened back in December 2020 on a flight from the Republic of Congo to Paris, France. In that case, there was a fuel leak, and safety procedure dictated that the pilot should have shut down the engine with the leak, but that didn't happen, and according to the report, that created a fire hazard. Now, this was not an isolated case. The report detailed other incidents where pilots haven't followed the proper safety procedures, and taken together, it suggested there is a certain culture among some Air France crews which encourages a propensity to underestimate the extent to which strict compliance with procedures contributes to safety. Now, the report also tries to put things into context, and that is that Air France literally flies thousands of routes every day, and so the number of flights, the number of crews being investigated, in the grand scheme of things, is very small.
CNN's Scott McLean there. Before we head off, some of your feedback on ram raids and the police saying that they're going to train up officers to do security assessments of businesses at risk. This person says, why are sworn officers being diverted from frontline duties to do dairy security assessments? Contract it to security companies, for God's sake. Stephen says, police should employ civilians to do fog cannon approvals, not take staff off the thin blue front line. On the subject of GST on your KiwiSaver fees, this person's flying well in the face of everybody else who's texted us. They say better healthcare, better education, better infrastructure. Let's pay the GST on KiwiSaver fees. And on the bird poo in Palmy, lots of suggestions here. This listener says, there is a John Cleese dead parrot joke somewhere to be found in the Palmerston North bird story. Keep working on it. We'd love to hear it. Another person says, bird poo is very rich plant nutrient. Maybe we should collect it up and use it then. Richard says the birds are starlings coming to roost. Been doing it for years. The square has been ruined by mass car parking. Get rid of the parks and reinstate the green space, for goodness sake. Not alone in that suggestion from Richard. Mike Smith has got in touch to say, make the square no parking all day, 4 p.m. or 5 onwards, to avoid the issue. Someone else suggests playing Barry Manilow loud might fix the starling problem. That's Pete from Gore. Yeah, don't know about that. That's about all we've got time for. The late news team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. Remember, if you missed anything on the program, you can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahia pōpō. Tomorrow from 5 a.m, despite warnings from the Prime Minister not to travel to Ukraine, a New Zealand charity worker tells First Up why he is desperate for Kiwi volunteers.
RNZ News headlines. I'm Catriona McLeod. A government plan to charge GST on top of KiwiSaver fees from 2026 is expected to have a big impact on the amount of money in KiwiSaver accounts. A Dunedin man whose death is linked to the COVID vaccine was not warned of the risk of myocarditis. Christchurch police are still looking for an armed shooter after a man was seriously wounded in the suburb of Linwood today. And former Sydney teacher and rugby player Chris Dawson has been found guilty of murdering his wife in the 1980s. Those are the headlines. More in the news at 7.
This is Music 101. I'm Charlotte Ryan. And on today's
Your
show,
handy 4-hour guide to arts, comedy and culture, books.
I'm sick of listening to a programme where the presenter tries to persuade people to gossip.
I couldn't have given 2 hoots when I was young, but I'm a bit interested now.
Saturday mornings with Kim Hill. Music 101 Saturday